Well, Greg Travers is the Director of Tax Services at accounting firm William Buck. Greg joins us now in the studio. Greg, thanks so much for dropping in today.
Thanks.
Is our tax system outdated and too complicated?
Yes and yes. So our tax system was designed, in a large part 100 years ago. The world has moved on a long way since then, and the digital economy is the best example of that. Our tax system struggles to keep up with that. We've also had layer upon layer of change introduced over many years. That adds complexity. That means high compliance costs.
For the bulk of us who are wage and salary earners, how much should we be prepared for less money in the pocket? How much of all of this discussion will inevitably mean higher taxes or a greater range of taxes, therefore at the end of the day, less money?
So it's a good question. One of the things that's front and centre in this document is the idea of bracket creep. And if that issue, so the idea that your salary goes up but your tax rate ends up going up higher, so you end up with less in your pocket. That issue, if that could be addressed, that would actually mean more money after tax for most individuals. And that's just a structural problem that's in our tax system. So if you can address that, that's actually a good thing for quite a lot of people.
Greg, so much has been spoken about the GST, obviously, in Jane's report there as well. A lot of critics say that poorer people generally spend more of their income on goods and services. So poorer people are potentially going to be hit harder with higher GST. What would you say to that?
I'd say in a lot of instances that's correct. I'd say GST is a hard tax for people to escape, so it is a good tax in terms of taxing higher income earners as well, because they also spend their income, but they do save proportionately more. If you were going to do something like change the tax rate for GST or extend it to include, say, medical services or education and the like, you can't do that in isolation. You'd need to do something to make sure that the lower income or vulnerable people were looked after, because otherwise it would have an adverse impact on them.
So how would you do that?
You do that through the social security system. So you've got the two different hands to balance those things.
Well, the Treasurer says he wants to have a fair income conversation, his words, a fair income conversation about the pressures that the tax system is experiencing. Let's have more of a fair income conversation with your good self. What are the greatest pressures that the tax system has, and broadly speaking, who is the most heavily impacted?
Well, I'll give you an example. SME businesses. So the estimate that's in the report is that the businesses spend $40 million a year complying with tax. SME businesses spend 18 of that 40 million. So that's nearly half the total compliance costs. They contribute about 20 to 30% of the actual tax take. So proportionately, SME businesses are paying a lot more in compliance costs than any other businesses. And it's because of the way the tax system has evolved and their need to deal with some quite complex issues that really were never intended to actually apply to sort of SME businesses.
Broadly speaking, tax reform or a new tax system, what should be achieved in a societal view? People feeling like their money that they work hard for is being used fairly amongst people? What is the ideal ethically and sort of philosophically around tax?
Okay, so my view is always that a tax system should be equitable. So a person or a business in the same sort of economic situation should get the same tax outcomes. That doesn't happen under our system at the moment. And it should be efficient. It shouldn't be something that is really difficult for people to be able to comply with. It should be something where you can pay your fair amount of tax and then you can move on. That to me is two of the fundamental principles that you'd need for a good tax system.
How far do you think this will end up going? Will there be discussion, review of tax breaks, say, for investment properties, for superannuation, for example?
Yeah, look, I think that there will be. So there's two things I think are going to influence that. One is political will. So unless we've got people on all sides of politics that are prepared to have this discussion, then it's not going to happen. If we do get the political will, then I think everything's got to be on the table. Superannuation, negative gearing, whatever it happens to be, it's the only way you're going to get the right sort of outcome.
Greg, how do you get a public on board where people are always going to be sceptical about tax? When you have politicians and accountants like yourself talking about how this is going to probably be a good thing, how the system needs to be overhauled, how can the public trust those voices?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is a really good question, and if you looked at the history with previous governments that have tried this, most have failed. That's where bipartisan support comes in. That's where I think if you can move this away from politics and say, for the country, we actually need a tax system that is going to work into the future. We don't have that at the moment. It's in all our interests to get this sorted out. That's the message we need our leaders to come up with.
Greg Travers, accountant and tax expert, thanks very much. And may I say, I apologise that my co-presenter just said politicians and accountants like yourself,
In the same
lumping
sentence.
you in the same breath.
I do apologise, Greg. Thanks so much for dropping in.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.